At my husband's memorial service, my son Daniel stood at the lectern, his voice quivering, and expressed gratitude to another woman. She was the one who truly felt like family, he said. Every head in the room turned toward the woman in the front row, dressed in a sleek gown with flawless makeup, delicate tears glistening in her eyes. I, the actual wife and mother, sat off to the side, unseen, a ghost in my own life. Later, when the attorney revealed that my husband had bequeathed everything to her, leaving me nothing, Laura Mitchell hugged my son and flashed a victorious smile, as if she'd already claimed her prize. But then I revealed a second will, and suddenly, no one in the room was smiling anymore. I never thought my life would restart at a funeral. James passed away in a sudden car crash. It was a rainy morning, and he was driving through the city. They said the brakes gave out on a turn, sending his car into a storefront. He was gone instantly. The coroner assured me he didn't suffer, but I wasn't convinced he deserved such a swift exit. We'd been married for 40 years. I always believed our marriage, though not a fairy tale, was sturdy, like an old house, battered by time but still standing strong. I left my career to manage our household, every detail, every corner. He'd always say, "I'll provide for you, you don't need to work." I trusted him, foolishly thinking it was love. At the service, I wore his favorite navy coat and stood by the chapel doors, greeting mourners. The wind stung my face, my hands numb, but I kept smiling, ensuring his farewell was proper and poised. James obsessed over appearances, always caring about others' opinions. Even in death, I was upholding that polished image for him. Daniel stood at the podium. Our only child, 33, a software developer for a tech firm, wore a crisp black suit. His expression was somber, his voice steady. After sharing a eulogy for his father, he paused, eyes welling up. "I want to give a special thanks," Daniel said, his voice cracking, "to someone who was there for my dad in his hardest moments, Miss Laura Mitchell." A hush spread through the crowd. I gripped my purse, my fingers tightening. I thought he was about to say, "my mother." In that moment, I could almost hear it, recognition for 40 years of devotion, late nights at the hospital, silent sacrifices. I believed he finally saw me. But his words cut through me like a jagged knife, shredding that hope. "Someone who stood by my father through his toughest days, Miss Laura Mitchell." A murmur rippled through the pews. From the front row, a woman rose, dabbing her eyes, nodding graciously. She wore a deep sapphire coat, sleek heels, impeccable makeup, her hair perfectly styled. As she sat, heads turned, whispers of curiosity spreading. A deafening silence roared in my ears. Laura Mitchell. I knew her name. She was James's assistant at the company. He'd later made her a senior consultant, even putting her on the board briefly. When I'd ask about her, he'd brush it off. "She's capable. Don't overthink it." I recalled a company gala years ago. She handed me a glass of wine, smiling warmly, moving with confidence. I dismissed her as just another eager employee. How naive I was. Someone nearby whispered, "She's sitting so close, like she's part of the family." And my son, had just thanked her at his father's funeral. The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. My ears buzzed, the world tilting. Mourners shook my hand, offering condolences. "He was a great man. We'll miss him." I nodded mechanically, programmed to respond. I planned to hold it together, but then I overheard Daniel whisper to Laura, "You're the one who's really family." My teacup nearly slipped from my hand. This funeral wasn't just for James. It was for a secret life I never knew, and I was a stranger in it. That night, alone in our quiet house, I shed the coat and noticed its frayed hem, as if the last thread of our marriage had unraveled. I sat at the dining table, staring at empty chairs. James's seat remained untouched, its armrest cold. I hadn't moved it. For years, he'd sat there, waiting for me to serve his meal. There were still cans of his favorite craft beer in the fridge. I never liked the taste, too sharp. But he'd buy a pack every week just for himself. Habits, I realized, are the cruelest cages. I didn't sleep. I dug out old photo albums. In them, we were young, his eyes bright, my smile effortless. I found my old work ID from when I was a financial analyst at his company, confident, always seated near the head of the table. Then he said, "Quit, I'll handle everything." And I foolishly agreed. I closed the album and sipped water. The kitchen clock ticked. All the effort, the pride I poured into our marriage was buried when he died, but a deeper betrayal awaited. The next day, in the lawyer's office, Every word felt like a script from someone else's life. The office smelled of paper and polished wood. A faded American flag hung on the wall, sunlight streaming through slats, cutting the floor into stripes. The law firm was James's choice, named in his estate plans. The attorney, a man in his late 50s with a deliberate tone, spoke. Per the will signed by Mr. James Carter 3 years ago, he said, the bulk of his assets, including the primary home in Oakwood, the beach house in Cape Cod, and his remaining accounts are bequeathed to Miss Laura Mitchell. I wasn't just shocked. I felt erased, pushed off the stage of my own story, left in the shadows of a role I thought was mine. I glanced at Daniel. He sat rigid, staring ahead as if hearing a routine report. No surprise, no reaction, as if he'd known all along. After the reading, I approached him. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He met my gaze calm. "Dad had his reasons." "His reasons?" I whispered, the words catching. "What were 40 years of marriage worth?" Daniel paused, then said softly, "He worked hard his whole life. Laura was there for him. She got him." His voice softened, almost guilty. "You didn't." In that moment, I saw it clearly. I wasn't just losing my husband, I was losing my son. He wasn't honoring his father's memory. He was rewriting our family, erasing me. At home, I stood in the driveway, my purse heavy in my hand. I opened James's closet. His suits, ties, and sweaters hung neatly, carrying the faint scent of his cologne. But what lies hid in those threads? When did he decide I wasn't family? Was it the year I forgot his favorite scotch for our anniversary, or earlier, when I left my job to become a homemaker? I searched drawers, old files, photos, receipts. In a kitchen cabinet, I found a folder of letters. One, from the Cape Cod property manager, was addressed to Laura, dated 6 years ago. My hands trembled. I'd been to that beach house, never knowing I was a visitor in her world. That afternoon, I visited our neighbor, Ellen, a widow in her 70s with a sharp mind and a garden full of lilies. When I mentioned Laura, her expression tightened. "Laura, wasn't she the one James took to those charity galas?" she asked. "You didn't go." I forced a smile, my throat dry. "I wasn't big on events." Ellen stirred her coffee. "I always thought they were close. She was here a few times. One Christmas, she helped James with the decorations." I froze. That Christmas, I was laid up with a sprained ankle. James said a neighbor's kid helped. "When did they get close?" I asked. Ellen sipped her drink. "Maybe 10, 12 years ago. I saw her when you were visiting your sister. I thought she was a relative." 12 years. I sat in Ellen's sunroom, feeling like I'd wandered into someone else's life. I'd managed our finances meticulously, picked out his clothes, used my inheritance to save his company during a crisis. And all along, he'd been building a future for another woman. In the basement, I found a box of photos. One showed James with Laura at a corporate event, his hand on her arm, his smile brighter than I'd ever seen. Another included Daniel, barely 20, standing with them, his grin hesitant but warm. A note on one photo's edge, partially erased, read, "Our family will be real someday." Something shattered inside me, not my heart, but something deeper. Trust. That night, I lit a candle and played a soft blues record, the first music I'd chosen for myself in years. I realized I'd lived to James's tune, never dancing to my own. That ended now. I thought the betrayal was the worst of it. The will, the properties, Laura claiming her place as family. But what broke me was Daniel. He was my only child, my anchor. We met at a local diner, where he used to love milkshakes as a kid. He arrived in a coat, his posture stiff, like he was at a business meeting. He set his phone face down, a signal he could leave any moment. "Why did you send Laura a legal notice?" he asked bluntly. I met his gaze. "Should I not have?" he shrugged. "She didn't wrong you. Dad chose to give her the money." "Chose," I said, my voice breaking. "He lied to me for decades. I gave up my career, my dreams, for this family. I sold my mother's sapphire ring for your tuition. Do you know what that meant to me?" Daniel sighed, irritated. "You always bring that up like I'm in debt to you." His words hit like a punch. "Dad told me," he continued, "his best years were with Laura. She got him. She didn't judge him like you did." "I judged him because he stopped respecting me," I snapped. "I called him out because he was wrong." Daniel shook his head, dismissive. "You're too old-fashioned, Mom. You think sacrifice is noble. Dad didn't want that kind of love." I saw it then. He'd felt this way for years, just never said it. I pulled out a faded photo. "When you were 2, we went to the coast," I said, sliding it across. Your dad bilayed for work, so it was just us. In the picture, he's in tiny blue shorts, standing on wet sand, little footprints trailing behind. You were scared of the waves, clinging to me, yelling, Mommy. You knew where safety was. Daniel glanced at it, silent. You worship your father, I said. He was polished, charming. But did you ever think I built the foundation for that man to exist? He looked up, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Dad said Laura made him feel alive. You were too strong, too strong. I thought of nights balancing budgets, cooking through fevers, swallowing tears at James's coldness while smiling. That was my strength. I tucked the photo away and stood. You're right, I was too strong. And now I'm saving that strength for me. I didn't hear his reply. I walked out into the rain, the drops steady on my car's windshield. I didn't cry. I sat in the driver's seat, realizing I'd lost my husband, my family, my son. But I also knew I could no longer let others define me. It was time to live for myself. At first, I thought Laura was a midlife fling, a schemer who slipped in. But she wasn't. She'd planned it all. One rainy afternoon, I sat with cold tea, scrolling her public Instagram. Her profile showed her on a beach, smiling, the background softly blurred. Her bio read, architectural consultant, lover of jazz and volunteering, blessed by life's gentle moments. Her photos told a different story. One showed James in a lawn chair, eating peach cobbler she'd baked. The caption, his smile's my favorite gift. Dated 6 years ago when I was bedridden with sciatica. James had said he was swamped with work, traveling. I believed him. Now I knew he wasn't avoiding me, he was living another life. More photos, James in her apartment, wearing the jacket I bought him. James helping her plant roses. Then a video, James raising a glass at a holiday party, Laura's arm around Daniel, then a college kid with shaggy hair. She laughed, saying, your dad's proud of you. My hand froze. Laura wasn't just James's secret. She'd been weaving herself into our family, sidelining me. I called Sarah, a former colleague from James's firm, now semi-retired, helping raise her grandkids and taking freelance accounting gigs. She picked up quickly. Maggie, I heard about James. I meant to reach out. Thanks, I said, cutting to the chase. Sarah, I need help digging into something. She didn't hesitate. What's your hunch? I steadied my voice. I think James funneled company money to Laura for years, maybe for properties or other things. Sarah paused. This isn't just about your marriage, Maggie. This could be fraud. I want the truth, I said. We agreed to meet at her place in 2 days. I went to the county library and pulled Laura's property records. A townhouse in Oakwood, bought 5 years ago during a company housing initiative James led. I'd visited that project joking, take me next time. He'd laughed it off. You wouldn't like it. Now I knew why it was hers. At Sarah's cozy bungalow, lined with fading marigolds, she handed me iced tea and opened her laptop. I found some old transaction logs, she said, pointing to entries labeled External Advisory Services. The recipient's a shell company, no real address. One transfer. $60,000, made when I was recovering from surgery. My stomach churned. Sarah looked at me. You sure you want to pursue this? Most people would walk away. I saved the file to a USB drive without a word. Driving home, the sun glared through the windshield, the radio playing a folk song. The truth comes when you stop pretending. At home, I saved Laura's Instagram photos to a folder labeled Proof. I was no longer the woman who hid her pain behind a kitchen counter. I was Maggie Carter, James's legal wife, Daniel's mother, erased from my own story, and I was rewriting the ending. I emailed Sarah's findings to a fraud lawyer. The subject: suspicious transactions. The records showed transfers to Peak Advisory, LLC, linked to Laura, $400,000 over 5 years, time to dodge audits. Sarah's note: possible fraudulent diversion. My resolve hardened. I met a lawyer specializing in corporate fraud, a woman in her 50s with a sharp bob and a no-nonsense tone. Send me everything, she said. I compiled 60 documents, photos, emails, records, and handed them over. She skimmed the folder, nodding. We'll review this, I'll call you. I thanked her, my voice steady. The next few months were a blur of meetings and filings. We sued Laura Mitchell, and the case shook the community. James's firm, his estate, and his lawyer were dragged in. Daniel sided with Laura, furious. You're ruining Dad's legacy, he said over the phone. He ruined mine, I replied. The man who betrayed his wife and son's mother, that's the truth. He hung up. I waited for him to call back. He didn't. It stung, but I pressed on. In court, Laura's team called it a misunderstanding, claiming the funds were legitimate. I spoke of our 40-year marriage, my sacrifices, the betrayal's weight. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, seemed to understand. We won. Laura had to sell the properties bought with stolen funds. She lost her job, her reputation, and vanished. Daniel didn't speak to me for years. Then, at my father's funeral, he called. We met, hugged, and slowly rebuilt. I shared the full story, and he began to see the illusion he'd believed. "Mom," he said, smiling, "when did you get so good at standing up for yourself?" I laughed. "I always was. You just didn't notice." I pointed to a rose bush I'd planted 20 years ago. It nearly died last year. I almost gave up on it, but this spring, it bloomed brighter than ever. That night, alone, I folded the chairs by the oak tree, took off my shoes, and walked barefoot into the house. I hung up my dress and went to bed. I knew who I was, a survivor, a fighter, freed by the truth.